This week on the Discovering God podcast.
When I was growing up, sin was talked about to an obsessive amount where we never heard the heart of God.
The Bible doesn't take sin lightly and be permissive with it. Go, well, every once in a while it's okay or anything like that.
What's God's heart? It's a heart of grace, but it's also a heart of truth.
All right, hey everybody, welcome back to another Discovering God podcast. We're back with Jeff McLean and Chris Freet. Welcome everybody. And I'm Rip Wahlberg. And so guys, let's jump right into it, just so we put this right on the table. Today we're going to talk about sin. So here's
just a light topic.
A light topic, exactly. Back into it, just jump into the deep end. So here's how I'm thinking about it. We've been in ministry a long time, and I'm sure we've all heard, hey, the Bible is just a book of do's and don'ts. And so what I want to do is try to let the Bible speak for itself tonight. And is that really true? So I'm not quite sure, like, which question is it we're trying to answer here, but that's the basic premise. Is the Bible a book of do's and don'ts? Another way to say it, is God a cosmic bully waiting there like with a baseball bat, just waiting to pounce on the person who breaks the law so he can punish them? Or is the Bible, even a little different thing, maybe from within the church, like, is it actually focused on trying to get us to focus on moral behavior and behavior modification? All that kind of stuff. Because when I see the Bible, and the more I'm reading it and I'm seeing God in the Bible, I'm going, that's not how it's talking about it. So I'll kind of leave it there. That's sort of the beginning, but what might some of your thoughts be? How have you thought of this? Have you thought of this before? Like, does this go through your head at all?
Does it go through my head at all? Yeah, I mean, hey, let's face it, for sure, a critique that has been lobbied or lobbed against the church for years and against the scriptures is that we're sin police. We're only concerned with catching people's hands in the cookie jar. We're concerned with judging other people. And so for sure, the scriptures get judged or critiqued as this book of do's and don'ts, or a book of sin. And certainly, if you've ever spent time in the scriptures, there's a lot more to it. There's even more behind that. But at face value, that's what it gets labeled as. I think in today's time, this is a thing a lot of people are wrestling with, because when I was growing up, sin was talked about to an obsessive amount where we never heard the heart of God communicated. We never talked about what does it mean to accept God's rule and reign in every arena and area of your life. And then it went through the seeker-sensitive years of the church where sin was almost trimmed down to just its brokenness, it's our messes. And I think there's some strength to that. And I'm not downplaying that, because I refer to sin as brokenness all the time as well. But it's almost like we swung the pendulum too far and then missed out on what it means to sin. And so this is an exciting one for me. I have some thoughts, but I want to, what are you thinking right now at the start of our show?
Yeah, I definitely have some thoughts as well. And when you guys were talking, I couldn't help but think back to my years growing up, not in a Christian family. We would have told you that we were believers, but no understanding of concept of sin, the cross, none of that. I had a view of God, but my view of God was this old guy in the sky with my name on the list. And whenever I messed up, there would be a red check mark placed behind my name. I had no understanding. Nobody told me that. I don't know where I picked that up from, but that was my understanding up until I met Jesus shortly after college. But
how many red check marks were you allowed to have next to your name? Just asking for a friend.
Yeah.
How many check marks did you have after your name?
Next topic.
Yeah.
Too many to count, I'm sure. But yeah. I do think too that maybe I'll say in some circles in the church there can be a tendency even to that's how we approach the Bible, right? It's as I'm reading it, I'm reading it. What do I need to do? What do I need to not do? So it's not anything more than that. That's the kind of the level. But even I remember early when I was learning how to preach, one of the things that was emphasized emphasized to me was you have to make it applicable, right? You have to make it applicable, right? And so, well, how does that then play into this whole talk about the topic of sin? Yeah. Right?
Yeah. So doing a little reading and stuff, couple definitions that I like in reading a dictionary about, or evangelical dictionary. The author says, sin is trying to displace God or living as if there were no God. And when I look at the story of Adam and Eve, I think, it was much more than eating an apple. Like, this is just, I don't like the word metaphor for a lot of biblical context right now, but it's imagery, it's storytelling. So it doesn't matter if it was an apple, like, because it never even says that. It was, they ate the fruit or whatever. But the whole thing, they tried to take matters in their own hands when they were supposed to start learning how to do it God's way. And so that living as if there is no God, they wanted to displace God in their own right, by just doing it their way. And I think that speaks a lot to the heart of humans and how we approach, how we just approach our relationship with God and this whole subject.
I think that when we see people get hung up on the word sin, they're almost always equating it to a legalistic idea of guilt. There was a few years ago, I read a book called The 3D Gospel. I don't know if either of you guys have ever read it, but it talks about how it, very Western, post-modern, or even in a modern era for us as the church, sin and the legalistic idea of guilt, or the feeling of guilty, need to go one and the same. But they were unpacking how in other cultures, it's not always the sense of guilt. Like, guilt doesn't translate into all Asian cultures and so on. And he spoke to how sin is also coming to realize your powerlessness, which Paul also talks about. It's also realizing the way it brings dishonor.
Powerless against it?
Powerlessness against it, or it even robs you of the good in you. The power, So you're powerless to overcome it, but it steals some power from you. And also he spoke to the idea of it brings dishonor. In some cultures, being guilty will not make you feel shame in that culture, but if you did something that brought shame onto the family. And so they were talking about sin really needs contextualized in the culture in which it is.
Yeah.
And I only bring that up to say that I have found, among working with those suffering from homelessness, and I even polled some of them, and I polled our staff on relating to them, the average person isn't feeling the legalistic guilt in today's time associated with sin as much as they're feeling the shame or the dishonor, right? Or the powerlessness, the idea that they've been stripped of anything good and that they can't be anything else. And so few people will argue that, I haven't sinned, but they might not feel that sense of legalistic guilt that we've attracted to it. And I think there's remorse and confession needed for our sin. But I also think that when we're talking about sin in a way that you're talking about it, what we need to first own at the start is it's a lot more broad than we've often chose to explain it as. And I also think it always amazes me. It's a 3-letter word, but we've made it this big, scary cloud. Like, all you have to do is mention sin in a random conversation, and people will look at you like, oh, you're bringing that. I mean, it carries so much weight. It's such a little word, but it carries so much weight.
Well, so maybe a better question to have started our time with would have been this. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, does God want sin to keep us from him? And maybe that's kind of a bit of a launching
Well, you didn't have
point.
any more definitions? I was excited.
I got another definition.
Okay.
Sure I do. Sure I do. So this guy
I
blows
like definitions.
Definitions are,
Okay.
I think they're helpful. He says, in a legalistic religion, sin is a violation of a moral taboo. And then he says, in evangelical perspective, sin is an offense against love. Sin is wounding God's heart.
These are totally theologian answers. All right,
Of
Chris,
course.
answer it to me
Of
in a
course.
pastor's way. What is
Sin
sin?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, just some
And I
thoughts.
agree with you that those are right, but yeah.
Yeah, and just some thoughts too, and kind of want to build on what you were saying as well, Jeff. And the more I'm in this game, so to speak, and the more I'm studying the Word, the more I'm seeing there's a lot more nuance in things than we maybe were initially taught, right? Like let's just not trying to sidetrack us, but the atonement, for example. I like how Scott McKnight in his book on the atonement describes it as a diamond with all the different facets, and each facet, it's Christus Victor, it's the substitutionary atonement, and it's not one over the other, it's all
Many
of them,
sides.
of them,
Holding tension.
and based on the context and so on and so forth, one will speak better into a context than another, perhaps. But we can focus on the substitutionary atonement theory over the others, right? And so even
You might. Some of us are liberationists in here.
yeah. Well, if we and so I share that to say, I'm wondering if it's similar with sin, right? Like if it's not just we might want to try to define it just as like one thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But it's actually more of a diamond
right.
with different facets, and there are different aspects to it. So to define it, we need to kind of look at it as the whole, because I know, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head here, the Greek word for sin is hamartos, or where we get hamartiology from, right? It's the whole study of sin, right? And it means something like miss the mark.
Yeah, it's an archery term.
It's an archery term, right? Well,
Right.
what's that even mean though? What's the mark? Do we have to define what the target is, right? And so it's not. I don't think it lends itself
Well, if you want to get
to
there,
yeah.
isn't it missing the mark is the standard of perfection, basically? So it's not being like Jesus. Now we'll get all systematic.
I haven't used the word perfection. I mean, I agree that it is that, but so when I talk about it with people, I say, God's best just always seems to be out of reach. And because I'm not sure it's always perfection. I mean, you could do something perfectly that's just outside of God's will for your life as well. And so to me, it's that God's sense of best of what he wants for you, for your community, whatever. It's just always a little out of reach. And every time you pull the bow back, you just fail a little short, and then you give up and shoot the other way. And so both of those things are sin. They're missing the mark. You're missing the mark a little short of God's best. And then I'm not a fan of this movie, but Russell Crowe's Noah movie. You guys have seen it?
I have not seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, we're gonna have a movie.
The rock
night.
people?
Yeah, that's where I'm going. How'd you know
Okay.
that? So
Because it drove all the evangelicals crazy when it came
right,
out.
because they never read the Book of Enoch. But the Watchers, the
Yeah,
rock
the Watchers,
people,
right.
right? They were sent to Earth with a purpose. They over the time became the Earth because as they lived outside of God's best for them, they got weighed down with the molten and the rock of the earth, and they slowed down to they're all heavy. And when they finally do the job they're created to do, what happens? It all breaks up. Their spirits reconciled to God. Not good theology. I don't believe in the Watchers, at least at that level. But I would say that imagery is, for me, what sin's effects are. And so I'll tell people it's missing the mark. But every time that you miss the mark a little bit, and you're doing it every day, 365 days a year, it starts to weigh you down. rock starts to attach itself. It drags you, and it just keeps you to the point where you're docile or you're incapacitated from actually being any different. And that's sin's plan for you, but it's missing the mark enough to where it really disqualifies you or keeps you docile from experiencing another way of life.
Well, and I think there is something to the guilt and shame factor, because the guilt and shame that we do feel when we've sinned, more often than not, keeps us from God, keeps us from community with God's people. How many, we've all had people that are like, hey, where you been? I haven't seen you in church for, let's say weeks or whatever. And then you come to find out they're feeling bad because they did something some weeks ago or some months ago, and so forth, right? I also like how you brought up atonement, because it's so fascinating. Atonement plays into so much of how we read the Bible, and we don't even know it. And it plays into how we see God. So like for example, where I started out with the person that says it's just a book of do's and don'ts, and is it about moral behavior? Your view of atonement is the moral example. I always get confused on that. Exemplar theory. I always just want to say example, I guess, but right, that portion where
that cool like Roman Latin thing
exactly.
At the end of it,
yeah. and so but like you were saying, if you focus on just the one, you're so gonna miss the other aspects of God that you can't distinguish one from the other in exclusion. And it's like, yes, it could be that, but for example, Jesus paid it in your place. What does it tell you about God? Or Jesus came and defeated the principalities, rulers, and powers that were holding you, so that you're not like, and all of a sudden, if we focus on one, you don't realize how big and beautiful the picture really is, or the story really is, even when it comes to sin. That I mean, we sit there at Easter and we're like, we celebrate, Jesus paid it all, and he paid it in our place, and so forth. Yes. And yet, even still, so much more than that, because I think it's valuable to start with how does the Bible portray the heart and mind of God? And it really is not. My first approach is to want to punish you. So, for example, when I see Genesis 4, should be 4, right after the fall, and he then deals with Adam and Eve and the serpent, or no, at the end of 3. At the end of 3. Yeah. And they covered themselves with fig leaves. Yeah. And basically it's meant to show your solutions are not sufficient. And you can't cover your own guilt and shame. And so God then dealt with it because they were naked and aware, and they felt shame. And God in his grace covers them. I don't love this is the first sacrifice and it points to Jesus thing. I just think it shows us an element of the heart of God, that he's not out to get us. It broke his heart that now we're going to be separated. And he doesn't want it to keep us, he doesn't want our sin to keep us from him.
I think one of the scriptures that we use to define sin the most comes out of James, right? James 4:17, so whoever knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, for him it is sin. And that's one of the ways that we've come to understand sin the most. It's a sense of, we know what we ought to do, as Paul says, but I do the thing I don't want to do. But I think there's more to it even than just missing the mark or making a wrong choice. Some of it's subconscious, right? I think of when Paul tells the Colossian church to put away your passions, right? Your passions come out of your sinful nature or your human nature quite naturally, inherently. But there's also a reality that as I've been focusing on sin in my devotions and trying to get a better holistic view of it, I'm realizing that so much sin when it's addressed, certainly has to do with the obstacles it puts between us and God. But I think the sin that gets God the angriest is when our way of living affects other people or causes other people to sin. I'm not ready to make a theological point out of this yet, but I'm just saying, as I've been looking at sin, I'm constantly realizing the sins that seem to trigger God the most, or the wrongdoings, the brokenness that seems to, is when our way of living affects somebody else in a really negative way. And that seems to be another level of sin that I think the church has missed altogether.
Yeah. And my thoughts are in the direction of yours, Jeff. You know, both when I think of Genesis 3 and the effects of the transformation that happens there, or the deformation that happens there in light of the first two chapters, there's broken relationship, right? There's broken relationship with God, broken relationship with self, broken relationship with others,
created order,
and the created order. So there's kind of those four aspects of broken relationship. And when I think we see that there's not a direct connection, but something that I was thinking about leading up to our conversation was Galatians 5 and the fruit of the Spirit passage.
Yeah.
Right. If you look at that list of the fruit of the flesh, and just in my quick opinion, I would just summarize those actions as selfishness.
Yep.
They're all self-focused actions, right? Which then is going to affect my relationship with God, my relationship with self, my relationship with others, and even my relationship with creation itself, right? And so I'm wondering how that then plays into our understanding of what sinfulness is.
And it really prevents us from fulfilling, well, like the Edenic mandate, right? Not just to be fruitful and multiply, but the image of God factor, right? The standing in the place in creation that we were meant to have. Sin will prevent us from fulfilling that.
Yeah.
Just so many ways, but it's gonna get in the way. So when you hear these things and you're thinking of it from the moral behavior stuff, don't sin or you'll go to hell, and I don't disagree with those things, but I wonder if we've talked our doctrine so much that people no longer care, and we haven't really conveyed the story. And I don't want to say the story of sin, but how else do you say, like, the story within which sin is a part, right? And we are affected by it. How, according to the story, are we affected by it, kind of thing. I love Tom Schreiner. I'm reading a book of his, and he says grace is all over the Old Testament. In fact, the book of Deuteronomy, which is a recapitulation of Leviticus, Exodus too. Like, there's all kinds of stuff where Moses is giving the law. He looks like he's giving the law in both places, but he's giving these do's and don'ts. But half of them were so that you can go into the land that I'm about to give you. So Deuteronomy is next generation of Israelites after the first generation passed on. And it's so that you'll live long in the land. Like, so when people are when their accusation is it's a book of do's and don'ts, it's like, man, you're totally missing, but we're not even telling the story. We're focused on don't sin so you'll, because you could go to hell. No, like, this is going to get in the way of you fulfilling God's purpose. It gets for them, it was getting in the way of being with the presence of God in a new Eden. It was, you'll lose Eden again if you sin and keep on sinning and all that. Like, the land was tied to it. And I find too that it's a sense of grace and kindness. Like, half of the stuff of what you're supposed to do was like when you give sacrifices and the cleansing stuff, that was for the things that, not because you did evil, but because you were just made, it's a bad term, but like you were made dirty, and you can't be in sacred space in that condition.
Ceremonially unclean.
There's the word, ceremonial unclean, for doing the stuff that happens in normal everyday life. Not for the big bad evils, but just the normal. So God made provision for that, so that when we're ceremonially unclean, we find a way back into his presence. We're not always kept out.
I'm a low church guy. I don't enjoy a lot of ritual and tradition, but I would tell you, I do think that many of us low church evangelical guys could develop some better habits and practices, annual rituals, if you will. You know, the Jewish culture has Yom Kippur, which part of that and the way it's celebrated is to look at what reconciliation needs to happen between you and God, but also realizing that can't happen until you first ask people. And I've had friends that are Jewish ask me, like, have I ever offended you over the past year? How can I make it right? Like, so this realization that our reconciliation over sin with God also involves our reconciliation with each other. And in reflecting on that recently, I've been reflecting on the Lord's Prayer, right? I mean, that's where my doctoral studies are. And depending on how you grew up, you sang trespass. You would say trespasses or sins or debts, right? And probably the word debt is the closest. I like trespasses. It's probably not the best, but I think in our culture it makes sense. But there's this financial debt, or that you have borrowed from equity you don't have when you sin, both from God. And so not only is it this sense of guilt that you've done something bad, but it's also this, you've overdrawn your equity. You've borrowed something, you've taken something that doesn't belong to you. And those sins, I think we miss in the evangelical, especially among certain camps within the evangelical and Protestant worlds, that it's almost like we're indebted to each other in some way. And our job then is to reinvest in each other. And I've been reflecting on that a lot more as I think about sin and as I pray, like, man, I realize that even when somebody injustices me, I want justice, but I also want them to hurt a little bit. And when I do that, then I'm all of a sudden in debt. Not only have they borrowed from me, then I put myself into greater debt and put them into greater debt, and we get trapped. To me, sin is really an act of imprisonment that we make for ourselves. I think sin really is God allowing the choices we've made a lot of times, the choices we've made and how they're going to affect us. He allows it. It's not that he's like always saying, here's a consequence for that sin, but he's, you know, I had someone recently come to me and he was just like, man, I've made these wrong choices. And he gave me like these 10 choices. And it was one of those things where you're sitting there and like, gosh, I've made some bad choices, but I've never made choices like that. You know what I mean? And, you know, that's not where I should have been, but it sometimes things strike you. And at the end of it, he said, but God must hate me because, man, I've asked for forgiveness and I'm still stuck in the consequences. And I was like, yeah, let's just think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
And we were able, then I said, well, tell me where you do see good in your life. And he ended up labeling like 10 other good things, right? I was like, well, God obviously hasn't abandoned you, but you're choosing to build it. I said, but God's not going to take us out of the muck and the mire that we've created for ourselves. Our choices have effects on us, right? That's why we see people like Job, his friends, saying like, you just need to repent of everything you've ever done, because our sins do have choices, are choices that we've made that do have effects on us, and they will entrap us in some way. They'll imprison us in some way. And one prayer for forgiveness may not get us out of there, but the way that we live debt-free to each other keeps us from getting in there. And that's a part I've been really reflecting on lately.
Yeah.
You know, as I'm hearing you describe those things, Jeff, I'm thinking two things. One is you're giving us a lot of abstract.
Fair.
No, it's good though. It's not a critique at all, because I realize abstract leads to something that becomes concrete. Once we see a concept and we can draw the meaning, then all of a sudden we have something that is concrete. Like I'm probably never going to lose sight of that kind of end result, right? The other thing I'm hearing is something that I think both of you kind of touched on is you're talking about like equity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're tapping an equity you don't have. And I'm hearing in my mind, it just brings me to the idea of perhaps the best way not to sin is to learn how to love something more other than ourselves. And I think Wimber may have said something like that.
This quote's on my mind. I'm going to see if it's the same one.
Go
ahead.
for it.
No. Wimber used to say, the more I think about my sin, the more I sin. Is this where you were going?
It's close. Yeah.
But the more I focus on Jesus, the less I sin.
The less I sin.
Yeah.
So like learning how to love something more than just myself.
That's good.
You know, is how not to sin. And it still meets in that same thing with like whichever one of you guys were saying that about doing harm to ourself and another person is sin. Not sinning is learning how to love beyond myself.
Yeah.
Which I find, I'm sure we all don't find that easy, but you know, massively important.
Yeah. I think when we read the scriptures, because we don't like to do the inner work, we start from a really broken place with the scriptures. And then we read Jesus and we see goodness. And all of a sudden we know we're defined by the goodness of Jesus, the goodness of God now because of our confession of faith, because of our commitment to him. But then we almost, unfortunately, elevate ourselves instantly before we've actually done the work to get the bad stuff out, right? Or as Stripe used to say, to get the hell out of you, right? Like there's still hell ruling in your life. And all of a sudden, though, because, you know, we've known the scriptures well, we've elevated ourselves. And that's why the scripture has become a rule book, because people have used it that way. People have used it as a way of beating each other up, where the more I read the scripture, and I think one of the things that keeps us, people always say it's confusing, that's what keeps me out of it. I think the thing that keeps us out of it is it's a mirror. The more I hold up scripture, the more it forces me to face my own shadow areas. Yeah. And in that, I should be driven not to greater sense of I need to be God's justice in the world as much as, man, I need to look inward here. Right? That's why Paul tells us before we practice the Lord's table to look in and make sure there's nothing that anyone has against us or we have against them. It should drive us inward. I mean, I ran into this quote when we were preparing for this by Nowen, and he said, each day our society bombards us with a myriad of images and sounds. The words yell and scream at us, eat me, drink me, buy me, hire me, look at me, talk to me, sleep with me. Whether we ask for that or not is not the question. We simply can't go far without being engulfed by words and images intruding themselves into our minds. That's to me what sin is. There's a world out there that's doing everything to get in there. And Keith Green, the early singer-songwriter, used to say, where was his quote here? He says, finally, we know we're following the right gospel if we learn to endure and overcome the lust of the flesh. And by that I mean we're learning to live free from all the things that look to bind us to the world. So sin is everything that wants to bind us to the carnal nature, to the brokenness around us, to the ways of this world, to the kingdoms of this world. And they're advertising, branding, marketing themselves every day. And unless we're putting our nose in this book more and more, we're not seeing the mirror to put our own selves in check. And so to me, sin's less about policing other people and more about policing myself, because it's my sin that I do that affects other people that creates more sin in the world. It's a never-ending cycle.
But it's easier to point out somebody else's
it is.
than to look inwardly.
Especially if your sin doesn't feel as bad as my sin.
That's right. That's right.
So how do we think the Bible portrays the heart of God relevant to sin? So like I'll jump in and you guys follow on whatever you want to share. But when I see this, I see, like I said before, I see in Genesis, God covered their guilt and shame. He provided them clothing of animal skin, right? And then I see Jesus, the incarnation of the Father himself. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And it always strikes me with the woman caught in adultery, and they're bringing her and they throw her before Jesus. Rabbi, she's not only done adultery, we just caught her in the act. And it's a whole rabbinical thing. There's very important people around in this one. And it's kind of a showdown, as you guys know. And when they leave, one by one, because of his question, then he says, woman, where are your accusers? No one's here, Lord. And he says, well, then neither do I accuse you. And I love that there's a whole bunch of rabbinical imagery in there about like there was no two people to affirm this thing and so forth. And yet he also says, but go and stop doing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
he is concerned with sin.
Yeah.
Clearly. So it's like when I asked the question, is he permissive with it? By all means, no, he's not permissive with it. The Bible doesn't take sin lightly and be permissive with it. Go, well, every once in a while it's okay or anything like that. But what it I like to think of it as, in my first question always being, what does this show me about God? Mm-hmm. And okay, so you can't say he's permissive, but you can say, my Lord, he is gracious and kind. Mm-hmm. And again, I guess my answer would be he does not want our sin to keep us from him. Mm-hmm. And yet it's the very thing that the question we're starting with is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that passage. And I think I would respond just by building on that and saying, John 1:14, right? Jesus, it tabernacled, right? The presence of God tabernacled in Jesus, and he brought forth grace and truth. And I think that passage that you just described, Rip, is one of those places where we see that grace and truth working together. The grace is, neither do I condemn you.
Yeah.
The truth is, now go and sin no more, right? Chapter 5, the man born blind, we see grace and truth. Right? Do you want to get well? And Jesus heals him of his I believe he's crippled. And then at the end of that, he says the truth piece, stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. Right? And not like in a condemning way, but it's, hey,
check yourself.
Here's the truth. Right? I've given you grace. I'm showing you grace, but with grace also comes truth. Right? And so I think what's God's heart? It's a heart of grace, but it's also a heart of truth. And I think for some of us, or maybe I'll just speak for myself, for me, I find it hard to kind of live in the messy middle of that tension, right? We're either, I heard someone say one time, we're either gracies or we're truthies.
Wow.
Right? We tend to emphasize one over the other, right? The truthies tend to be the fundamentalists, and the gracies can tend to be more the liberal side of Christianity, right? Mm-hmm. But the reality is it's not one over the other. It's embracing the either or tension of grace and truth.
Yeah.
Right? The grace welcomes in. The grace covers the shame. Right? The grace provides the covering from Genesis 3, right? Mm-hmm. But then the truth is, hey, you need to get real with this.
Like, this is going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Or this is going to hurt us.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
This is going to affect relationships. Yeah. Your relationship with God. Again, those 4 relationships, right? Mm. So for me, like, God's heart is both. It's that combination of grace and truth working together.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at the followers of Jesus, the 12, I mean, they sinned constantly and consistently, even at his side. We're well aware of some of their sins. There was many more not recorded, right? But I mean, Jesus has no problem telling Peter, hey, you're acting like Satan right now, the Hasatan, right? You're the accuser. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he's not casting him out of his sight. Jesus even says, Peter, you're going to deny me, but still brings Peter back in and gives him a great missional call to the church, right? I love the passage that you brought up in John about the woman caught in adultery, because scholars debate what Jesus wrote in the dirt. Some people say, well, he might have wrote sins or things associated with sins of some of the people there. I think he wrote the Ten Commandments. I have no way of proving this, but building on the imagery alone, God, with his finger, writes onto the tablets in the Moses story, right, and gives people the law, the Ten Commandments. He gives them this way of living, realizing that, this is the best way to live, but they're not going to live up to it. There's grace from day one. But I think as Jesus wrote the 10, they all realized that they were guilty of them in some way. And so I think that because John's way of developing his narrative is constantly comparing him to Moses and how he's greater. Like Moses got manna, but Jesus produced manna on his fingertips. You know what I mean? And and there was so much left over, they could keep it. Like there's these comparisons all the way from the start of John up to that story, portraying Jesus greater than Moses. And so I look at that story and I'm like, Jesus was writing the Ten Commandments to realize that he's like, I know we all have sinned. Like you've all, not we, he didn't sin, but you have all sinned. You've all broken these things that I've told you not to break. And so where's your grace? I think there's some other stuff going on there. I think she was probably caught in a betrothal, not an actual marriage, which actually then their questioning on law gets a little wearied. And I think Jesus knew that too. But yeah, for the most part, I think he was focusing on the Ten Commandments to show him the very simplest of the things he called them to was impossible. And the disciples, right? Jesus doesn't cast them out. So we see grace from Jesus, and we can't lose sight that Jesus is God in the flesh. So what we see at play in Jesus is God. But even in the Old Testament, there's always a way back. Even when the consequences of sin drive Israel out of their land or out of a promise, he always says, but when you do this, or when this time comes, there's restoration.
Here's the path back.
Yeah, there's always, because that's his heart. He wants us close to his heart. There's more times focused on, if you seek me, you'll find me, than there is people getting banished or excommunicated from God's best.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end our conversation. And I just wish that as the church, I hope we can continue communicating our story versus our doctrines alone. Because again, I think story is more compelling. In this case, the story of it and where sin sits within that story. And I'm thinking of the person that would say, oh, it's just a book of do's and don'ts. And then to your last point, like, okay, but God, when the Bible's talking about it, it's always providing a way back to God. I think that would just rattle the person. It might or might not, depending on the condition of their heart. But I would think it even is trying to communicate to them, like, no, God actually wants, he's interested in you coming back. You can, wag your finger at him all you want, but he's still interested in you coming back to him too. And I hope we can figure out ways to really be telling our story. Go ahead.
We're not downplaying sin. I mean, sin is huge in the Bible. I was just thinking of all the passages earlier, and I wrote some down, but I would often reflect it too. It was a lot of Paul saying, deal with the sin in you, right? Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And that put to death what is earthly in you, and that's found in Colossians 3:5, right? To me, captures our response to sin.
Yeah.
It's personal, it's internal. There's areas and arenas of our lives. There's little compartments throughout our whole life, and we're pushing the darkness earthly out by inviting Jesus in, right? And he does become lordship of our heart the minute we confess our commitment to him. But the rest of us takes a little more time. My financial, my physical health, my sexual health, whatever, all those things have to be surrendered to the lordship of Jesus. And so sin can still live in those places. And it's our job to squeeze it out, to push it out, to put it to death,
Right.
and get Jesus into those spaces.
And I would just add, that has to happen in community,
yes.
Mhm.
right? That has to happen in intimate relationship with other people who are also following the same path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That we can't do. Yeah, you just can't do it alone.
Yeah.
So, hey guys, thanks for the conversation, and thank you for joining us. And we would encourage you and hope you'll go look into God's Word, read some of this for yourself. We hope that as you do, that you'll come face to face with God by coming face to face with His Word, and have a great week. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Discovering God podcast. And if you did, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. And you can find us on all the social media platforms under Discovering God. Just look for the compass.